The power of will. We can reflect now upon will, and what this means in the work. In order to talk about will, it is necessary to think first about influences coming down to us from the ray of creation. We are told that one of the objectives of this work is to place us under new influences, by working on certain aspects of ourselves through particular effort. If there were no new influences to connect with, there would be no point to this work on the self. The ray of creation shows different influences filtering down from upper levels, so let's examine these influences for a moment. In order to access the correct centers, it is helpful to reference those influences rather than trying to describe them, which means that the will of the Absolute does not reach this earth. The will of the Absolute, in passing down the ray of creation, reaches us indirectly, through an increasing number of mechanical laws or forces. Which is one reason why it is implored in the Lord's Prayer, "May thy will be done on earth." This informs us that the Word of God is not carried out upon this planet. The objective of real esotericism is to connect humanity with the will of God, and to break us free from our own self-will. If we undertake this work from the stance of good spirit, if we try to work on ourselves with regard to non-identifying, non-internal considering and so on, if we at least try to remember ourselves in the sense of this work, knowing from its inference that there is something higher that we can touch, then it is possible to speak of what will means. Will consists of sensing finer influences, those influences reaching us from higher levels as forces coming down the ray of creation. If you feel your self-love and self-interests, then you will not feel the presence of any other kind of influence. There is a connection in this regard between this commentary about will and the two previous commentaries about new meaning and self-love. From self-love we can only have self-will, with its many interesting forms of imagination. We dream, for example, of having power, of everyone being subservient to us, or at the very least enacting our will and doing what we consider is best for them. This kind of self-aggrandizement cannot pave the way to relationship with higher influence. Fourth way, individuals must be in life, and begin to know what life is like, through personal experience. An individual in this work who has not been through the influences and experience that life offers on this planet is not necessarily ready for it. And it is here that a double meaning or duality comes into effect, something that becomes more familiar through time. On the one side there is that feeling that there is something else, if one has magnetic center. On the other hand there is a sense of the lack or inadequacy of life experience. Which is why it is so difficult in this work to see whether a person should be more in life, or more in the work. Most people that have tried to work on themselves for a certain length of time can understand this. However, the point is that unless we put ourselves under the influences that we know, then learn from those influences, we cannot find a way to reach the unencountered and so lift the veil. Unless we have attended primary or elementary school, we cannot pass into and enter secondary or high school. The idea of this work is to be able to connect with new influences, and the ray of creation illustrates how these influences exist. Different levels of forces, different levels of influences are like further schools of meaning, thought, feeling and ultimately of action. When work influences begin to act upon us, we find what was full of meaning becomes either more full of meaning or perhaps less so. The highest school that we can belong to on this earth is the solar school, a school that sounds the note so. An intermediary school is the planetary school, a place that sounds in the side octave, on the note T or sidereal world. A school on earth tells of the side octave from the sun, and sounds the three notes La, So and Fa, which means that we are all on this earth, meeting one another in the schools La, So or Fa. The three dimensions as the three types. Unless there were this side octave, there would be no opportunity for development of any kind. By that word development we mostly imagine something that is either very difficult or unattainable, contrary to what development actually means. Consider what this work teaches about negative emotions, non-identifying and false personality. Going against those influences means rising in the ray of creation. All esotericism teaches that in order to go up, we have first to go down. Few understand what this actually means, and the lessons of the looking glass offered in Lewis Carroll's novel of 1871. To obtain more one must go down, then to get less we go in the same way as always. Our being transmits our life. If we have nothing that at present satisfies us completely, this is because of the state of our being, and we will never get what we want as long as our being is tuned into that wavelength, resting on that note. We have to change ourselves to receive new influences, and changing ourselves always involves getting rid of the self. If we truly want to attain will, then we must always possess will and intent about what we are not, and not from what we are. If we try to increase ourselves such as we are, then things only become worse than they are at present. The development of real will consists of feeling, experiencing and then living new influences, of what's referred to often as practice. Looking at what the work teaches about will, it notes that such will as we have, is the outcome of our desires. That in this case each eye has its own will. In order to keep our aim, the power of will is required. Let's then suppose that someone formulates a minor aim, such as not to walk in a hurry or not to multitask quite so much. For a short time they actually manage to stick to this aim. However, the next moment they hurry as before, and for weeks forget what was resolved. Someone could resolve to keep a pleasant expression on their face, and indeed does so for a while. Then dinner is served and their face assumes its ordinary expressions. How can we then increase our will? Take for example a person who makes a wider aim than those mentioned. They wish not to identify with a particular recurring negative emotion. One way is to think about what external considering means in this context, and then to try to put that into practice with reference to the source of the particular negative state. Their self-love does not wish to externally consider. It does not bother about people in far worse situations than they find themselves within, and so feels a right to be negative when it chooses to do so. Nothing is easier than to bear the misfortunes of others nobly. One of the vows in original Buddhist schools was to have compassion for others. However, it is curious to reflect upon the connection between external considering and increase of will. It is curious to begin to see upon what real will depends, for obviously real will is not self-will. One might imagine will means having one's own way, yet this is not the case. We can leave this aspect of the development of will, because the work itself will show where any true connection lies. It is fairly useless to hear always and not experience, to be told and not to practice. In fact, being told actually prevents experience. If an individual is told something about themselves that they are not within sight of experiencing, it only hinders them, which again illustrates the importance of silence, one of the hardest lessons of parenting. Because the response will be, I am told I am negative, or I am told that I am greedy. This work acts upon our being according to the understanding of it. Our level and nothing else could take the place of understanding. Instruction is not the same as seeing. We are advised all day long by well-meaning souls. So when someone actually agrees with us, we feel reinforced in our ordinary will, and vice versa. If we decide to do something and people approve or praise us, we feel as if we possess more force, but if they disagree we feel deprived of energy, even demotivated. Interestingly enough, here lies a tipping point. Naturally, all sorts of complicated personal reactions take place under such circumstances. However, we rarely make aims or decisions that do not depend to some extent at least on the support of someone or other, possibly even the public, through social media, blogging and so on. This is aim made in public, from the rooftops. A decision or an aim, made in solitude seems unreal, perhaps even thin, without color and so uninteresting, which means we do things usually with some admixture of being seen of others and so do not do our arms in secret. In making an aim, and in thinking about real will or its quality and taste, it is always worthwhile reading the 6th chapter of Matthew, in its opening verses 1 to 5. Here are preserved some very deep formulations about wrong aim and will. Take heed that ye do not your alms before men, to be seen of them, otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth. That thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. But when ye pray, use not vain repetitions, as the heathen do. for they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking. Will made from false personality is interesting to study. It fails, of course, but that does not mean it is necessarily entirely wrong either. However, it has no soil and so lacks depth. As an aim descends in depth, it changes, becoming more essential. Becoming an aim without word, some wordless thing, yet a direction one seeks to go in, rather than a slogan. But it must start with some kind of phrase, some sort of word command and a degree of formulation. It is possible to see how from one moment to another, what we call our will changes, due to the separate wills of different I's, so that whatever we finally do, is the resultant of the desires of all these different I's. People need to see this firsthand for themselves, because we do not realize it. We feel, and so we insist that we have will. The existence or realization of real will is like suddenly seeing the solution to a mathematical problem, an epiphany from something that has been vexing us for quite some time. It is our eureka moment. Usually we associate the concept of will with a set and firm jaw, a dogged, unwavering resolve at the gym, on track, or during workout class. This is a negative view of will. The idea that real will is something positive is eventually of great value to our personal work. Ordinarily we think of will as something negative, because we conceive it only as being exerted against, in opposition to habits such as slothfulness or torpor, for example. We often say that we will resist this or we will not do that, tending to associate will with resistance to something, like brakes to stop a vehicle. This is a negative concept of will, but of course it has its place. However, what is being referred to in this commentary is an entirely different concept of will. It is something positive that finds the correct solutions. It unites separate things, it arranges them in right order and so creates something new and previously unknown. It contains the idea of new possibilities and is not mere denial, simple negation, and the cessation of everything, but an arrival at some combination, a new attainment. It has to do with the certainty that a solution is even possible, combined with a certain kind of active patience towards the at present unresolved situation, where we do not as yet see the next connection. Then find ourselves suddenly just knowing. It requires a certain kind of active patience because it has nothing to do with resignation. The work will find a way, and this is the patience required. Often enough we feel confused, particularly after some shock. It seems that everything is scattered, in little bits, swirling without relation, particularly when we have been asleep for a long time and working only in imagination. If we lose our orientation to the work, things can indeed disassemble. So what does will mean in such a case? A mathematician who has harvested a great number of facts, yet cannot see how they are connected to obtain a certain solution, certain possibilities, is in the same situation. Suppose, however, they are actively patient, as patience is the mother of all will. There really is some solution and some possibility or other. The confidence of the mathematician is based upon a feeling that relations between physical things are expressible in terms of mathematical formulae, that some sort of solution for a mass of scattered observations can be found eventually. It is the same with this work. It has meaning, or rather out of every situation it is possible to garnish wisdom. Things apparently diverse can be brought into some unity of purpose. It is like asking and then waiting. Change of meaning must mean change from former ruling concepts. So we can connect the positive idea of will with the attainment of new meaning, and not simply with negation and deprivation. When a mathematician suddenly sees a solution, they see new meaning. It is to this that teachers compare will. When we begin to realize that will is delight rather than privation, we begin to realize what aim might really mean, as something worth attaining. First, we all have to make aim that is negative, because we understand no aim otherwise at first. It is often said in teaching of this work, that negative things breed only negative results. We are very fond of this negative garden of ours, then collect and resow its seeds or bulbs with care. Its atmosphere is bad, and we absorb a great deal of impediment and malady whilst walking about in it. The center of gravity of will lies in our emotional center, the center that represents the object of this work in awakening, and which works so imperfectly in us, such as we are presently. Consider here, the three-storied house of humanity once more, and write in each story the function chiefly connected with it. Our attention is being drawn toward new meaning and new emotions. Will is connected mainly with emotional center, and it is from the development of this center that will begins. Our ordinary concept of will is a set jaw, a stern, unshakable resolve, stiff neck and so on. But it is actually a new emotion, some new insight, very quiet and without violence. To possess new will in any circumstance is to have a new emotion entering a familiar situation, which is one way that we can begin to think of will. It has many facets and again, it is a unity of things rather than a splitting up, a synthesis rather than any analysis. Real will is infinitely flexible. If we live on the causal plane of life, the level of cause in the past and effect in the future, then we possess that kind of will, derived from the past. Why? Because in time a cause always seems to be in the past. Yet causes can be in the future too. This is an odd and perhaps strange idea for some. Everything we build up in ourselves through work becomes a transforming cause of the future. To live mechanically on the level of cause and effect is one thing that we have to notice in order to understand. Here nothing can happen save that the past gives rise to a mechanical effect in the future. We must know a great deal about that aspect of life, this possible viewpoint. If there were no mercy of God, it would work out as inevitable. Yet even science, which is based on the study of cause and effect, has reached the point at which it says that things are not determined, but causal. Causal is not causal. To regard one's life as nothing but causal is not to grasp the idea that everyone can come into new causal influence, through self-remembering. Otherwise there would be only truth and no mercy. This idea is expressed in religious literature as forgiveness of sins. However, if you feel there is nothing other than literal cause and effect, then it is really impossible to transform life. All transformation depends upon the idea that we can be under one set or another of influences. The ray of creation teaches that there are many orders of influence. Will is a question of new emotions, new thoughts, new feelings, and its quality depends upon transmitting them, hearing them and feeling them. On one scale of influence things look to be the cause and effect of that level of influences. However, it is possible to see everything in a new light, then the whole series of cause and effect in our life takes on new meaning. If we believe, however, that life is just as we see it, then new orientation does not visit us. That is one of the central teachings of the Gospels, in the remaining fragments of Christ's teaching. Is there not a great deal said about the forgiveness of sins, the forgiveness of your neighbor and so on? Why is this so? We have to see that on one plane, on one level of living, there can be only mechanical cause and effect. The level of cause and effect belonging to it. However, the Gospels and this work teach that if we do the work, there exists a totally different line of cause and effect, and a transforming force enters our existence. Reflection on what will in the work sense means is a wide subject in and of itself. It depends upon falling under influences higher than ourselves, if you like, catching some rays. Will is not self-will. Look through the Gospels and read what Christ says of his temptation. Whose will was he following? To will the work is an easy phrase to coin. To see what it actually means is another question. To have will in a real sense, we must feel our own nothingness, the nothingness of our own personal and vainglorious aims. Apart from many other things, there is one way to sense this nothingness. As in, for example, what we dislike. Is it not strange to consider that real will depends upon going in a direction that has nothing to do with our own wishes?